Hi, this is Dr. Gregory Sadler. I'm a professor of philosophy and the president and founder of an educational consulting company called Reason.io, where we put philosophy into practice. I've studied and taught philosophy for over 20 years, and I find that many people run into difficulties reading classic philosophical texts. Sometimes it's the way things are said or how the text is structured. But the concepts themselves are not always that complicated, and that's where I come in. To help students and lifelong learners, I've been producing longer lecture videos and posting them to YouTube. Many viewers say they find them useful. What you're currently watching is part of a new series of shorter videos, each of them focused on one core concept from an important philosophical text. I hope you find it useful as well. In Chapter 13 of On Interpretation, Aristotle is going to at first draw out a number of implications of modal propositions. That's the term that we use. It's not a term that he ever uses in his works, but what do we mean by these? Well, propositions that are articulated in terms of or making reference to possibility, contingency, impossibility, necessity, or synonyms of these terms. And at the very beginning of chapter 13, so the translation here is from these affirmations and negations set out in the foregoing manner, certain consequences logically follow. The affirmations and negations are in the previous chapter, and yes, you can read that in there a little bit more literally. Following the Greek, we can say, for propositions that are set out in these ways, huto, in this way, tithemenois, right, literally set down, right, so or posited, you could say. There arise, he's using a term for coming into being, gignotai. Logically, that works katalogon, or in accordance with some sort of analogy. Certain consequences, akoluses, right? And implications works, but consequences mean what follow from it, right? So from setting out modal propositions, we get other things that we can say that might take it into a different modality. And this is where it gets very, very interesting. Now, the translations try to make a little bit more sense of this than the Greek text. So we get there being 5 different propositions, which then lead to another one. In the Greek, it's actually just 4, but Aristotle makes a kind of side remark having to do with it is contingent, that is, endechethestai, right? Enai, it is contingent that it be, or it literally, it's accepting that it can be the case. He is going to call that, or he's going to say that is an antistrophe or a correlative. Antistrephai is the Greek term with the other one, which is what? It may be, or it is possible. Dunaton enai. Dunaton means possible or possibility. So saying it may be is another way of saying it is possible. And so Aristotle is going to draw some, inferences, we could call them, or followings or consequences from each of these things, from it may be, which is, as I just mentioned, dunaton enai. He'll also bring up, now the one that he brings up next is it may not be, which can also be understood as it is contingent that it should not be. And that's going to be the third in the sort of chart that he's going to lay out, or the table as it's called. And then it cannot be, so it's not possible for it to be is another way. It's not contingent that it be. And then it cannot not be. Now, understand there's a double negative there, and that works in Greek. It also does work in English. It cannot not be. We understand what that means. So if you're worried about there being double negatives, just put those worries aside for the moment. And then Aristotle is actually going to refer to we could call it chart, or it's translated here as table, tes hypographes, right? And he says, I'm going to translate it here in a somewhat figurative way. Hey, take a look at this. Theoresto, right? Why don't you contemplate this table? So, we've replicated it here. And you notice that the propositions that are in there are all modal propositions. And what they allow us to do is to say, well, the first one doesn't just imply the ones after them. They can be taken as other ways to say the same thing. All right, so maybe we can actually go back and forth between them. So let's look at the first one. It may be. It is contingent, right? So dunaton enai and dechomenon enai. And what does that translate into in terms of impossibility and necessity? To say that it may be or that it's contingent is to say it is not impossible that it should be. There's no impossibility there, right? So you could actually, if you wanted to put it in somewhat different English, say it's not impossible that it's the case. It's also not necessary that it be. And now notice, to say that it's not necessary that it should be and it's not impossible that it should be, these don't mean the same thing. So they don't follow from each other. To say it's not necessary that it should be leaves open the possibility, pun intended, that it could in fact be impossible for it to be, right? So what we can say is it may be, it is contingent. Those lead to it's not impossible that it should be, it's not necessary that it should be. So that one I think is pretty easy to wrap our heads around. It gets a little bit more complicated the more knots we introduce to it. So the second one is a negation. It cannot be. It is not possible for it to be. That means it's also not contingent. Again, contingent here translates a term that means allowing or even literally welcoming, accepting that something is the case. Now notice what that does lead us to. It is impossible that it should be. This makes so much sense in lexical terms. If you say it's not possible that it be, you're saying it's impossible that it should be. The Greek is, it's not possible in the sense of dunaton, and impossible, the Greek term for that is adunaton. A is the privative, sort of like im in English. So saying something cannot be is saying that it's impossible that it should be. It's also saying it's necessary, but notice what the necessary is. Necessary that it should not be. Right? So there's a necessity there that gets invoked, we could say. Now, it starts to get a little bit more complicated. It may not be, which is dunaton me enai, right? It's possible for it not to be. We can say that also means it is contingent that it should not be, using contingent in roughly the same way as we do possible or that it may be the case. Now, notice when we get to necessity and impossibility, it gets a little bit more complicated. It is not impossible that it should not be. The fact that it may not be means that, you can't say that it's impossible that it may not be. So that makes good sense. It is not necessary that it should not be. Now, how does that follow? It may not be, So it could be the case that whatever it is that you're saying may not be. It is not necessary that it should not be. Why does Aristotle lump that in there? Uk anankaion me enai, because he thinks that that actually does follow from that. That's one of the more complicated ones. And then we get the fourth one. It cannot not be. Again, a double negative, right? It cannot be the case. It is not possible that it not be. In Greek, udunaton me enai. So it's not contingent that it should not be. That follows pretty simply. It is impossible that it should not be. Well, if it cannot not be, then it is impossible that it should not be. And then notice what we get as the last one. It is necessary that it should be. So there's no more not in there. We have a positive statement coming out of this. Anankaion enai in Greek. And if we look at these quite carefully, we notice that the first one obviously is about a fairly simple statement. It's saying it may be or it's possible that, and we're saying, well, what are the implications from that? Two of them, you notice that the simplest part of them is going to bear on possibility and impossibility. To say it is impossible that it should be is the same thing as to say it cannot be, right? But it is impossible is framing it positively as an affirmation, and it cannot be is actually, a negation, strictly speaking. So it's interesting that here we're getting to see what impossibility means, right? Which includes it's necessary that it should not be. We also get to see what necessity is in the fourth one. It is necessary that it should be, you're saying it has to be the case, means it cannot not be, or it is not contingent that it should be. And you're also saying it is impossible that it should not be. All of those can be correlated to each other. The only one where, if you really think it through, there's any sort of difficulties is the third, where it's not entirely clear why the necessity should follow in the way that it does. But the rest of them make pretty straightforward sense, and this is something that you could use to, figure out what follows from what. And notice that contingency and possibility very, very closely aligned, basically synonyms for each other in this, maybe just two ways of talking about the same sort of modality.